Donna, I'm just delighted to be able to sit here with you again and talk with you. And I've admired you for a long time. You know, you're somebody to me who sees a problem, wants to solve it, and brings her whole self to it. You know, your love, your heart, your brains, your amazing organizing capabilities. You know, and just kind of stepping back, right? You used to chain yourself to a Greenpeace boat, you know, on behalf of the environment. You started an ETF, an exchange traded fund, which is no easy matter in itself, and then you decided to make it an ethical ETF, which also is difficult. And now you and your business partner are starting LumenFarm. So take me through kind of your evolution and take me through your path with money.
Well, I guess the two paths kind of intermingle a little bit. So I came from an all-female working class family, and I absorbed a lot of love and a lot of sort of deep culture from inside. I actually believe that lots of poor people live inside oral culture more than literate culture. There weren't a lot of books in my house, but there were a lot of stories. My grandmother was a masterful storyteller and was born in 1903, so I was raised by someone born in the Victorian era, which had lots of layers, right? But the gift of my family was this deeply steeped female culture. And I feel like that's the through line now. When I look at my career, I've been working to bring the art of story, the viewpoint of a working class person, and the deep feminine into some very, I would argue, linear, harsh, male-dominated spaces, and including Greenpeace, which was pretty, you know, it was pretty boys' culture. I was the second woman on the action team in Canada. It was mostly men that were hanging off bridges and driving Zodiacs, and so that was fun. And then into the policy arena where I worked on carbon taxes, and then into the clean energy space, which is also male-dominated, followed by finance, and now tech.
Yes. And so what have you learned? I mean, you know, I'm thinking back to, because I love that you're focused on stories, because that's a lot of what changing a narrative, right? What is finance? What is money? And I would say, you know, the predominant narrative seems to be you can never have enough, and money has the most power, right? Those who have money typically are seen as, oh, I have to do whatever they want. But it's also an undercurrent, right, in our society, and it touches so many things. So tell me about, you know, your evolution and your thoughts about money and how it can either help or harm.
So, yeah, no, it's a really good question with lots of avenues, lots of rivulets. So I think of the financial system as the mother of all human systems. There's nothing human beings have ever invented that has become as powerful, right? The human culture, so the global human culture, hasn't ever built anything as fast, as global, as powerful as finance. And therefore, those of us who care about life and human dignity have to bring ourselves to the money system. We have to learn how it works and look for ways to disrupt and intervene, and I would argue wrap our arms and our hearts around the money system and drag it towards love. Drag it from fear and scarcity, which I would argue are right now the primary impulses. But money and currency is an energy, and that energy is neutral in its core incarnation. It's what we amplify, what we bring to the money system. Do we bring fear and terror and scarcity and hoarding? Or do we bring love and the feminine and life and dignity? And so we need to take back the money system. I think that's the course that I've been on for the last, well, probably a couple of decades, but but maybe more, I feel like sometimes I like to say I crawled up into the butt of finance on my way to the digestive system, right? Because once you get to the digestive system, you can start to turn the beast. But that's the starting point.
Why go in the front door?
I don't think necessarily people with my background are invited into the front door, right? And that's part of the change and the transformation that's happening, and why I think so many women get excited about my work. They feel like I'm inviting more people to come along, and that's been true in my experience working with Indigenous communities and street youth throughout my career, that the idea that people who feel left out sometimes really want an ambassador to be invited in. And I feel like that's part of my work, is to go in the back door and then find ways to invite lots more people inside.
And I'd love to hear more of your thoughts. That invitation in, I've worked with a lot of women who are also nervous about handling their money, and typically if they're in a heterosexual relationship, it's typically the man who works on that. So definitely a lot of fear. And I'd be interested to hear kind of your perspective of having other outsiders come into finance. I mean, it's pretty clear that there aren't very many people of color either, and certainly women of color who are active. So what kind of space can we hold for women and others and people of color to come in and reshape it? And I'd love to also hear you talk more about love and how can that heal the financial system we have.
I mean, there's many threads. I did a little bit of financial literacy in my past, and some work training Indigenous community youth around how to own and discover a cultural resonance with entrepreneurship. And a lot of those programs were about opening up money, economics, finance to people who have felt entirely left out and cut off. And I think whether it's intentional or accidental, it doesn't matter. It's 2019. It's time we taught young people of every possible demographic, this is how you manage money, and this is what money is, and this is what money can do, and this is the economic system, and this is what entrepreneurship is. Like, it feels absolutely irresponsible that we're not teaching these skills in our schools. And I think it could start in kindergarten, right? Like, we meet really entrepreneurial kids all the time, and mostly they come from more privileged backgrounds, right? And so the idea that we alienate young people from the financial and the money system just seems really wrong. So that's the first piece. And then the second piece is, I think we're teaching young people right now, either you have money and power and that's the way you're born, and that separates you from everybody else because you have to protect your money and everyone's gonna want your money. And so that does harm. And I'm seeing, I've met lots of wounded people who have enormous money and privilege, who I would argue are held back from the rest of society by their families, by now their own programming, and wounds, really deep guilt, shame, blame wounds. And then we're teaching poor kids that they don't have a place at all in the money system. And if you're in the neighborhood I grew up in Toronto, if you were really creative and you had ambition, you sold drugs. That's what you did. That's what all the entrepreneurial kids I knew did, because that was it. That was the ladder, right? If they wanted out, if they wanted to change their lives, if they were entrepreneurial, they often wound up in the legal economy and frequently incarcerated. So that's what we're teaching the most privileged and the least privileged young people right now. That is just so harmful. And first of all, we need to help people find each other across the 1% and the 99 and become what I think is Buckminster Fuller's most sort of profound idea, which was to build an economy that works for 100%. And I feel like that's part of my work. How do I take coming from a working class background and then being privileged, getting an education? I was the first person in my family to go to university, and it changed the world for me. It opened countless doors that otherwise would have been closed. And now I feel this responsibility and love the opportunity to bring other people with me, to invite Indigenous people into the financial world, people of color, women, because I think the world is starved for us. It really is. Like, this is a moment in time where we need to be the largest we in human history, and that's everyone 100%. And we need structures and systems, but we need, first of all, invitations, right? The world needs to invite us in. And I feel like, okay, so I'm going to be one of those callers that invites people in.
So as we invite people in, how do we make sure that the financial system is changing at that same time, right? Because to invite somebody into a structure that's already well established, the risk is that people learn that structure the way it is and perpetuate it, as opposed to being able to help evolve it, either to help more communities, for example. How would we create that bridge? Or
It's a hard question. It's a good question. So I think there's two pieces. The first one, I actually believe changing the who changes the what and the why. Not entirely. There are examples where, women of color are invited onto corporate boards and end up just being the next wave of people making bad decisions. That happens. Right. And so I think it's about inviting the whole of society inside systems like finance, and then pausing and listening. Part of what was different about what we did in Change Finance is several of us had these long careers in the climate movement. And so we fought for products that had zero exposure to fossil fuels. And people said, you can't do that. You will, there's no way you can have market performance with a financial product and no fossil fuels. You can't do it. And we said, well, we're going to try. And so we built the first ETF that was zero fossil exposure, that didn't have the banks from the Dakota Access Pipeline, that had really high standards on other environmental and social issues. And it's performed at a market level, which is what we believed it would do. Well, it's because we wanted it badly enough, and we believed that the market would be changing. It was like our commitment to values and the world that we could see, which doesn't include a fossil-driven economy, gave us the opportunity to be futurists and see a different world. Well, I think that's what outsiders bring to finance, right? That if you are a person of color, if you're gay, if you're a woman, if you grew up poor, you actually bring missing intelligence to the financial system that can create contrarian strategies that might actually just rock out and perform like gangbusters. And increasingly, if you look at the alternative financial market, that's happening more and more regularly. So it's actually a financial opportunity to see what more people see and gather wider intelligence. It's just that finance is still so arrogant and so male-dominated, and you have a whole bunch of people at the top in the financial industry who have closed their minds and think that you just need to use the same conventional formulas and look into the rearview mirror. But you can no longer determine that Chevron stock is going to be predicted going forward by looking at their past performance. That is a foolish decision. Sure. And so I think there's incredible opportunities for new people who see new things to come inside finance. even just from a financial standpoint, but it's also the right thing to do, right? It's also important to draw new energy into finance.
Yeah, and your point's well taken. I mean, there's so much room, and we were talking the other night about investing in African-American entrepreneurs,
Right.
investing in women of all
Yeah.
colors, and that there just aren't the same amount of vehicles. The people who are making decisions aren't the same, and there are very, very few people
Yeah.
in that space.
Yeah.
And your point's well taken that the who does change the what, but man, it's slow.
It's slow because we're still looking at a world where investment, and now that I'm in the tech space, I mean, the deals are still mostly going to the same smarty pants white boys in Silicon Valley. And that means actually that there is an over concentration of investment into a very small demographic, and there's missing opportunities, right? I mean, the same way that sort of redlined real estate districts are transforming right now in America, I think we have redlined human beings, where women, people of color, people that don't, indigenous people, people that don't fit the frame, the narrow frame that finance often has, actually represent an unprecedented opportunity. Women tend to run companies better than men, historically, and now. There's so much more innovation that's possible when you're gathering what diverse people know and can see. That creative genius that comes from the margins is an incredible opportunity for investment if people will just step out of their comfort zone and learn to value what these new people see.
So how do we change that narrative, right? Because typically in finance, it's been performance or risk-adjusted performance. It's like, how much money can I make? And that's typically been people's guidepost. I mean, from individuals to their financial advisors. So how do we help change that narrative?
Well, I think it's starting to evolve because people like you move into the investment space, right? You brought your perspective as a woman of color with a social justice background, and you moved in with a lot of guts to own the finance space and build frameworks in which women and people of color can make a difference with their money and see opportunities differently. I think that's the first piece. Then I think we have to decide we're going to share power differently. The sort of philanthropic sector is doing some interesting work where they're actually allowing and inviting people that represent poor people and people of color and indigenous people and women to actually make decisions about where the money goes from sort of a street level analysis. The Vancouver Foundation is one of the examples that I'm familiar with, and they have some really remarkable programs and projects where people on the front lines are making decisions about who gets money, how money moves, which is really different than the way the philanthropy sector has operated historically. I had some terrible experiences. I used to call it the sort of panel of Chanel suits, right? Where you would go in and talk about some really cool project that needed to happen, and these older women in Chanel suits would sort of sit with their arms crossed, and there was no way to really get there, right? It was almost impossible for them to really get what street youth needed or what indigenous communities represented, or the bridge just wasn't there because the people weren't sitting at that table making the decisions. I feel like that's changed a lot over the course of the last 20 or 30 years.
That's an interesting thought, though, right? I mean, how do you get, and I've often wondered, right, all these people who are up high creating financial products, and yet you have to get the input of people who are on the ground, but the bridge is just so far for finance. So is there a location where we could actually bring people together? And in fact, there is actually some common ground between people who just don't know the financial system at all, right? So like women are often afraid of the financial system because we often don't have exposure to it. And then activists, excuse me, also tend to have a fear of the financial system. And so it'd be interesting to kind of see how we could actually bring those two together, right?
That sounds like a fun gig.
It does. I know. Like, we can work on that.
Yeah, that sounds good. That sounds good. No, I think that's true. Like, and the thing is, activists know things about the world that finance needs to know. Yes. Women know really essential things about the world that finance needs to know. It's time for finance to wake up and be a little more humble in terms of where it gathers its intelligence and talent from. I would argue that's the biggest thing. Like 78% of financial products are still created exclusively by teams of straight white men. Right. What is that? Right. How is that even possible? Right. The construction sector is far more gender balanced than finance, right? Tech and finance are as bad as it gets in terms of white male privileged leadership, right? And so of course I'm drawn like a magnet to those spaces.
Right, and I mean I would also probably add North American European biased.
Correct.
As well, right?
Correct.
Yeah, boy, there's so much to work on, Donna. Okay, I'm trying to think where I want to go next. Let's talk about tech. Tell me about LumenFarm and this next adventure and what drew you to it. What are you hoping to achieve? What's the mission?
Well, LumenFarm is an interesting adventure on many levels. I was drawn into it by my partner, Frank, for a bunch of reasons. For one, it was really, really smart. And he's been designing it as a conscious business, and I think that's one of the things my heart was really longing for. I didn't fully have the language. I think I've moved from environment to sustainability to impact to regenerative to conscious. And this feels like that next level business that really has love as an underpinning. And that felt really potent. I did find the financial space to be hard and harsh and not always the most love-centered space. And I felt like there were ways in which I was really respected in the space and there were ways in which I was really mocked in the space. And I think there was a part of me that was feeling a little exhausted about that. And I felt so far very valued in tech in a way that's really interesting. As a woman, as someone who comes from a different place and carries different things, there's an interest, I think, right now in technology and machines serving humanity. I think there was a promise of that, that tech, to his credit, Steve Jobs sold a story of think different and we can be these brave, bold, creative heroes. And I think that was the invitation that he issued. I don't know that I would argue they fully realized that invitation. And I feel like there's a way in which LumenFarm could be that next evolution of that invitation where we say, it's not just about thinking differently, it's about thinking feelingly. It's about owning our animal body and our whole selves and our heart and bringing the incredible scalability and speed and replication and almost, yes, the addictive quality of technology. What if that served humanity? What if that served life? And that promise was part of what pulled me into LumenFarm, the idea that we could literally give people this incredibly sexy technology that could align who they are with how they spend their money. It's sort of the bookend, right? If change finance is how do you use your heart to guide your investments, this is how does your heart and hits of oxytocin going into your brain and your body connect you to how you touch the world every day with your money. That's the power of it.
So the mission of it then is you're trying to help people connect more deeply with their purchases. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the journey starts with, who are you? What are your values? What do you love? Then how do you align those deep, deep beliefs and values that you embody with how you spend your money? And how can you see it, be conscious of it, map it, feel a sense of pride about it? How do you stop buying crap? And how do you start seeing the things that you bring into your life as stories and impacts and the potential to give you greater peace and alignment? And in some ways, it's about recasting in the beginning the story of luxury. What is luxury? Well, luxury used to be kind of quality and exclusivity. What if all of a sudden we shift the lens and luxury is time and peace and alignment and beautiful stories?
And the ability to sleep well
Yeah,
at night.
absolutely.
When I think about a lot of the things that, that the modern day
Yeah,
complaints are, it's like, I can't
Yeah.
sleep, I'm worried about something. So
Yeah.
that peace,
Yeah.
obviously with yoga and meditation haven't taken off
yeah,
as well. That's a huge, huge piece of it.
absolutely.
So you're an artist, an entrepreneur, an activist, and I know a lot of the folks with Imagine are also hail from similar backgrounds. So what advice or thoughts do you have for, are there 3 actions that people can take, that anybody can take?
So I love that you started the question with those identities, because I used to almost force myself to sort of rank or prioritize or almost fight my nature in one of those buckets. And I think what I've learned is I am an artist, I am an activist, I am an entrepreneur, and that creative impulse and that serving life desire actually flow through me in all of those different manifestations. And I think as I get older, I want to give myself more and more time to reclaim my artist a little more. I think my artist has gotten a little bit, stuck inside serving the activist and the entrepreneur. And I think as I age, I feel the call of beauty and making beauty more and more. So I think value who you are. If you're in one of those identities, beautiful. If you're in all of those identities, beautiful. And then I do think alignment is the ultimate gift you give yourself in life, but for your death. I got to be a death doula a couple of years ago for a really beautiful man who was a priest who marched with Dr. King, built the largest union in Canada, served his entire life. And he really taught me that the key to dying well is living well. And so the more you work in alignment and shop in alignment and invest in alignment and vote in deep alignment, the greater the chances you will look back on your deathbed and have peace. And that's really what I want to be part of, giving people that incredible peace. This is a very tumultuous time, and lots of us carry a lot of grief about the whales, about the climate, about extreme poverty, about grave injustices. And I think the more we slow down and meditate and deepen our consciousness, the more we embody love in everything we do, the more we live to die well. And that's what I want for myself, but that's what I want for the larger world.
I know that I could talk to you forever.
Back at you, sister.
but I know we have time constraints too, and that seems like a perfect spot.
The fairies won't wait. It's one of the realities, the beautiful realities of islands.
Happiness, happiness, happiness.